Nadia Voss had negotiated contracts worth 9 figures without blinking. She had sat across tables from men who owned islands and governments and still managed to look bored. She was the best corporate attorney in the city and she knew it, and more importantly, every person who had ever tried to underestimate her knew it too, usually about 4 minutes too late. She was not prepared for Cale Morrow. Not because he was the most powerful private equity CEO in the country, though he was. Not because he was 6'2" of controlled, unhurried authority in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first car, though that was also true. She was not prepared for him because in 15 years of corporate law she had never once sat across the table from a man who listened to her the way he did. Completely, without performing patience, without waiting for her to finish so he could say what he'd already decided. She was also not prepared to discover, 11 months into working as his lead counsel, that he had been slowly and methodically building a case against the firm that had destroyed her mother's company 20 years ago. The same firm that had made her who she was. Because she had spent 20 years becoming the kind of lawyer who could one day burn them down. She had just never expected to find someone already holding the match. Their professional relationship began as most things with Cale did, on his terms, but so elegantly arranged that you didn't notice until you were already inside them. He had requested her specifically, which her managing partner delivered with barely concealed excitement, and which Nadia received with the mild suspicion she applied to anything that arrived too perfectly timed. She walked into his office on a Tuesday morning and he was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with his back to the door, looking out at the city the way men like him looked at things they owned. When he turned, she clocked everything in the first 3 seconds the way she always did. The precision of his appearance, the absence of unnecessary jewelry except one slim silver watch, the way he moved toward her without rushing, like he had already decided how this meeting ended. "You turned down Hargrove Capital last year," he said instead of hello. "Why?" "Their ethics clause had a loophole you could drive a freight train through," she said. "I don't work for people who build loopholes on purpose." He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, more like a door opening an inch. "Good," he said. "Sit down." She told herself the months that followed were purely professional. It was easy to tell herself things in daylight, in boardrooms, across tables covered in documentation. It was harder at 11 p.m. when he called her direct line because something in the Meridian acquisition had developed a complication and she was the only person he trusted to see it clearly, and they talked for 2 hours about contract law and she forgot entirely to watch the time. He never said anything that crossed a line. He was infuriatingly a perfect professional. But he paid attention to her the way that some men paid attention to things they intended to keep, and she noticed and she hated that she noticed and she kept showing up anyway. The discovery happened by accident. She was deep in the Meridian documents cross-referencing subsidiary records, when a name surfaced in a 20-year-old acquisition trail. Voss Textile Group. Her mother's company. Acquired under duress following a campaign of fraudulent regulatory complaints filed by a firm called Dunmore and Ackles. The same Dunmore and Ackles that Cale had been quietly, strategically, assembling a legal destruction package against for the past 3 years. She sat very still for a long time. Then she pulled every thread she could find. Cale had not known the Voss connection when he started. She confirmed that before she confronted him. She needed to be sure, because if he had known and used it, everything changed. But the timeline was clean. He had begun building the case against Dunmore and Ackles because of what they had done to 4 other companies, for other families, using the same fraudulent methodology. Her mother's company was one pattern in a much larger crime. She went to his office at 7 in the morning before anyone else arrived. He was already there. "You're going after Dunmore and Ackles," she said. He looked up from his desk. "Yes." "How long?" 3 years of building. "We're 4 months from being ready to file." "My mother's company is in your evidence file," she said. "Voss Textile. 2004. The silence that followed told her everything. He hadn't known. She watched him make the connection in real time, watched something move across that composed face that was not calculation but something rawer than that. "Nadia," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't make it soft. Just tell me where you are in the case." He told her everything. For 2 hours he laid out every thread, every document, every strategy. more than he had shared with anyone, including his own legal team. When he finished, she understood that what he had built was extraordinary. And she understood that what she had been building toward for 20 years had been waiting for this exact moment. "I want in," she said. "Not as your attorney. As a co-architect. That compromises your professional position." "I'll manage my professional position." He looked at her across the desk. "This will get difficult." "Everything worth doing does." The line between them had been blurring for months. It snapped that morning, not dramatically, not with a grand declaration, but with him reaching across the desk and covering her hand with his briefly, just long enough to mean something, and her letting him. The case broke publicly 8 weeks later. Dunmore and Ackles collapsed under the weight of 3 years of meticulous, airtight legal architecture. The senior partners faced criminal charges. The families they had destroyed over 2 decades received restitution settlements that Nadia negotiated personally, one by one, with the focused ferocity of someone who had been waiting her entire adult life to do exactly this. Her mother called her when the news broke, crying in a way Nadia hadn't heard since she was 9 years old. Cale was in her office when she ended the call. He didn't ask how she was. He just set a coffee on her desk and sat down across from her and stayed, the way he had learned she needed. Present, quiet, no performance of comfort. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he agreed. She looked at him across her desk and thought about 20 years of building herself into a weapon aimed at this outcome. She thought about how strange it was that the last piece had been standing right across a boardroom table from her. "You knew I was the best person for this case," she said. "I knew you were the best person," he said. The case was secondary. She held his gaze. Cale Morrow did not say things he didn't mean. She had 11 months of evidence for that. "You're going to be very difficult to work with going forward," she said. "Probably," he agreed. "Are you staying?" She picked up her coffee. "I haven't decided yet." The corner of his mouth moved. It was as close to a real smile as she had ever seen from him, and it was, she decided, completely unreasonable that it did what it did to her composure. She stayed.